When you are 67 years old and have a lifetime of struggle behind you, you begin to especially appreciate what you have earned through your own hard work. My house in Orland has become more than just a place where I live. It is a symbol of everything I have achieved by overcoming obstacles that sometimes seemed insurmountable. I, Higgins Bowling, have never received anything for free. Born into the family of an ordinary postal worker, I understood from an early age that if you want to achieve something, you can only count on yourself. My father died when I was 15, leaving my mother and me with virtually no means of support. I had to drop out of school and took a job as a handyman on a construction site, where I saw heavy construction equipment for the first time. At the time, I had no idea that one day I would own a company that manufactures specialized construction machinery. I started my business with a small workshop for repairing excavators. In the early years, I worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no days off or holidays. Gradually, things started to look up. I began hiring employees. And then I took a risk and purchased a patent for a unique hydraulic system, which subsequently brought me my initial capital. My marriage to Elizabeth, the mother of my only son Oliver, lasted 12 years. She couldn't stand my obsession with work and left when Oliver turned 10. I didn't blame her. She didn't get a husband, but a perpetually tired man who smelled of machine oil and only came home to sleep for a few hours. But my son and I remained close. I tried to be a good father despite the divorce. I paid for the best private schools and college for him and always supported his endeavors. Oliver grew up to be a smart guy, but unlike me, he always lacked strength of character. He was too easily influenced, especially by attractive women, and there were plenty of them in his life until he met Rachel Frost. As for the house, I bought it 6 years ago when I turned 61. For 20 years, I saved every penny I could afford not to invest in the business. I remember standing on the doorstep of this mansion with 3 bedrooms, a huge living room, a study, and a garden surrounded by a hedge, and I couldn't believe it was mine. $6,800,000, an amount I couldn't even dream of as a child. Light streams through the stained glass windows in the hall, casting colorful patterns on the marble floor. A wide staircase leads to the second floor where the bedrooms are located. The study, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, is my favorite place in the house. I spend most of my time here, even though I handed over the day-to-day running of the company to the board of directors long ago. However, I still make all the important decisions myself. Oliver first brought Rachel to my house about a year ago. Tall, slender, with copper hair and attentive green eyes, she immediately struck me as a woman who knew what she wanted out of life. She is 28, 14 years younger than my son. "Dad, meet Rachel." Oliver introduced her with a pride in his voice that was unusual for him. Rachel held out her hand with its immaculate manicure and smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've heard so much about you, Mr. Bowling. Oliver has told me so much." Her handshake was firm, almost masculine. I invited them into the living room, where our housekeeper, Juno, had already prepared tea and snacks. "What do you do, Rachel?" I asked when we settled into our chairs. "I'm currently on a creative quest," she shrugged slightly. "I've tried my hand at event planning, worked in real estate. Now I'm exploring opportunities in digital marketing." Her vague answer made me wary, but Oliver looked at her with such adoration that I decided not to spoil the moment with further questions. They got married 3 months after they met. The wedding was modest, just a few of Oliver's friends and no one from Rachel's side. When I asked why she hadn't invited her relatives, Rachel replied that she had a complicated relationship with her family and preferred not to keep in touch with them. Another red light went off in my head, but I ignored it too. The problems began when Oliver called me a week after the wedding. "Dad, we're having a little trouble with our housing," he began uncertainly. "The owner of the apartment we rented suddenly decided to sell it. Rachel and I are looking for something suitable, but so far without success. Would you mind if we stayed with you temporarily? Just for a month, at most, until we find our own place." I agreed without hesitation. The house is big, there's enough room for everyone. Besides, I thought it would be a good opportunity to get to know my new daughter-in-law better. They arrived the next day with 4 suitcases, suspiciously many for a temporary move. I gave them the guest bedroom on the second floor, a spacious room with its own bathroom and a small dressing room. "Mr. Bowling, this is amazing," Rachel exclaimed as she looked around the room. Such exquisite taste. Did you design it yourself? Call me by my first name. We're family now, I replied. And no, I hired professionals. I don't have the patience to choose shades and textures. Higgins, she said my name with an intonation as if she were tasting it. An unusual name. Who were you named after? My maternal grandfather. He was a fisherman and drowned a year before I was born. What a sad story. Rachel put her hand on my shoulder with a sympathetic expression on her face. At that moment, I noticed for the first time how skillfully she could imitate emotions without actually feeling them. Perhaps it was this insincerity that made me wary. The first few days of their stay were relatively uneventful. Oliver went to work. He was a financial analyst at an investment company. And Rachel, according to her, was looking for a new place to live and going to job interviews. Although I never once saw her actually go out to look at apartments, about a week after they moved in, I found Rachel in my office. She was standing at the desk looking through some papers. "Looking for something?" I asked, and she jumped, clearly not expecting to see me. "Oh, Higgins!" "You scared me," she said, quickly gathering the papers into a pile. "I just wanted to put them back where they belong." Juno was cleaning and accidentally scattered them. The lie was obvious. Juno never touched the documents on my desk, and besides, she had the day off. But I decided not to make a scene. "Next time, you'd better call me," I said, taking the papers from her. "Some of these documents are confidential." "Of course, I'm sorry." I didn't mean to invade your personal space. 2 weeks later, it became clear that the couple was in no hurry to find their own place. Oliver always found excuses. Either the apartment they had their eye on suddenly turned out to be occupied, or there were problems with the paperwork. And then one evening, over dinner, Rachel suddenly said something that made me even more wary. "You know, Higgins, we're so comfortable here. This house is just perfect for a family. Maybe we should think about a more long-term solution?" "What do you mean?" I asked, putting down my fork. "Well, the house is huge. You're here alone. And Oliver and I are planning to have children in the near future. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our grandchildren grew up close to their grandfather?" I looked at my son. He avoided my gaze, intently studying the contents of his plate. "We'll discuss it later," I replied, returning to my meal. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Something about Rachel made me instinctively distrustful. She was too calculating, too confident in her charm, and the ease with which she manipulated Oliver made me worry about his future. The next day, I decided to dig a little into her past. I called my old friend Eben Wartz, who worked for the Orland police. He promised to look into it, but warned me that it would take some time. Meanwhile, Rachel began to act more and more like the boss. She gave Juno instructions on cleaning and cooking, ordered new curtains for the living room without consulting me, and even invited her massage therapist to the house, using one of the spare rooms as a massage parlor. One day I came home earlier than usual and heard voices coming from the living room. Rachel was talking to a man. I stopped in the hallway and listened. "You have to give me more time, Thorne," Rachel said. "The old man isn't as simple as he seems, but I'm working on it. Soon everything will be under control." "You've had enough time," replied a male voice. "The boss is losing patience. Either you deliver what you promised, or we'll find another way. Tell him everything is going according to plan. Another month, 2 at most, and the house will be ours." I quietly backed away and left the house, carefully closing the door behind me. I needed to think about what I had heard. Who was this Thorne? And what kind of boss? What game was Rachel playing? That evening, I called Eben. "Did you find anything on Rachel Frost?" "Your sister-in-law is an interesting girl," he replied. "Rachel Frost came into existence just 3 years ago, when a certain Verna Lloyd got new documents. Before that, there was Catherine Moss. Both of these individuals have had problems with the law: fraud, document forgery, even suspicion of organizing a front company, although this could not be proven." "Damn," I cursed. "Does Oliver know?" "I doubt it. She's good at covering her tracks. Listen, Higgins, be careful. People like that will stop at nothing." After talking to Eben, I realized that the situation was much more serious than it had initially seemed. Rachel wasn't just trying to gain a foothold in my house. She clearly had some criminal connections and plans for my property. I spent the next few days pretending that nothing had changed while keeping a close eye on Rachel. She began inviting her friends over more often, all of whom looked like the kind of people you'd rather not run into in a dark alley. Oliver either didn't notice anything strange or chose to turn a blind eye. By the end of their first month there, I decided to talk to my son directly. I chose a moment when Rachel had gone shopping. "Son, I don't mean to be tactless, but how's the house hunt going?" Oliver looked away. "We're looking at options, Dad. We just haven't found anything suitable yet." "Oliver," I put my hand on his shoulder, "I know you're not even looking. Rachel plans to stay here permanently." "What's wrong with that?" he replied sharply, unexpectedly. "You live alone in a huge house. We could help you, take care of you." "I don't need to be taken care of," I said firmly. "I'm perfectly fine. And this house is mine. I don't mind you living here temporarily, but permanent residence is a different matter." "It's because of Rachel, isn't it? You don't like her." "It's not about liking her, son. I just want clarity in our relationship." The conversation ended in nothing. Oliver left, slamming the door, and I was left with the feeling that I was losing my only son. When Rachel returned, she was unusually friendly, even bringing me a cup of tea to my office, something she had never done before. "Higgins, I wanted to apologize if I gave the impression that I was imposing," she said with a disarming smile. "Oliver and I really appreciate your hospitality. And of course, we'll find our own place. It just takes time." "I understand," I replied, deciding to play along. "Don't rush, but keep in mind that I plan to start renovations in a month. The entire second floor will be uninhabitable." It was a lie, but I wanted to see her reaction. Rachel froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "Oh, then we definitely need to speed up the search," she laughed tensely. "Don't worry, we won't interfere with your plans." After she left, I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the situation. One thing was clear. Rachel wasn't going to back down so easily. That meant I had to be prepared for the battle for my house to begin. The first warning sign came a week after my conversation with Oliver. When I returned from the office, I discovered that my father's old armchair, which had always stood by the fireplace in the living room, was gone. In its place was some kind of modern sofa, white, angular, completely out of place in the classic interior. "Juno, what happened to the armchair?" I asked the housekeeper, who was dusting the bookshelves. The Filipina looked away, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "Mrs. Rachel told me to move it to the attic, sir. She said it was old-fashioned and spoiled the look of the room." I felt anger boiling up inside me. That chair was one of the few things I had left from my father. Ancient, worn, with patches on the armrests. To an outsider's eye, it might indeed have seemed ugly, but to me it was priceless. "Where is my son?" "Mr. Oliver hasn't returned from work yet, sir." I went up to the attic. The chair stood there, among boxes and old furniture, like a relic thrown away in the trash. I ran my hand over the worn upholstery, remembering how my father used to sit in it in the evenings, reading the newspaper and blowing smoke rings from his pipe. I remembered how I used to climb onto his lap when I was very little. In the evening, when Oliver returned, I tried to talk to him. "Son, do you know that Rachel put your grandfather's chair in the attic?" He shrugged with such indifference that it struck me. "Oh, that antique? She thinks it doesn't fit in with the modern design we want to create." "We?" I raised my eyebrows. "Oliver, this is my house, and I didn't agree to any design changes." "Come on, Dad," he waved his hand irritably. "You said yourself that you don't know anything about these things. Rachel just wants to make it cozier here. Besides, it's just an old chair. I don't understand why you're so attached to things." I didn't continue the argument. It was obvious that Oliver didn't understand or didn't want to understand my feelings. But that evening, I put the armchair back in its place and sent the modern sofa to the attic. Rachel said nothing when she discovered the rearrangement. She just pursed her lips and looked at me intently. There was something in her gaze that resembled a challenge. She wasn't going to back down. The next morning, I got up at 6 o'clock as usual. After half a century of work, the habit of getting up early has become an integral part of my life. I love this time. The silence, the first rays of the sun, the opportunity to calmly drink coffee and read the news. But that morning, when I went down to the kitchen, I found Rachel there. She was sitting at the table, sipping something from a large mug and looking at something on her tablet. "Good morning," I said, heading for the coffee machine. "Oh, Higgins," she looked up. "You get up so early." At your age, it must be hard, right? You should get more rest. At my age, I chuckled, a routine is especially important. Besides, I've been getting up like this my whole life. Well, now you can afford to relax. She smiled with a condescension that made me cringe. By the way, I changed the code on the alarm. The old one was too simple. It's not safe. The new code is 8921. Will you remember it? I froze with a cup of coffee in my hand. You changed the code on my house alarm without my knowledge? Our house, she corrected gently. We're family, right? And I'm concerned about safety. You don't want anything bad to happen, do you? The threat in her words was so transparent that I even admired her audacity. Rachel, I said, trying to sound calm, I appreciate your concern, but in the future, please consult with me before making such changes. It is my house, after all. Of course, she smiled again, but her eyes remained cold. I just wanted what was best. That evening, I called in specialists and replaced the entire security system, installing new locks and an alarm with biometric access. Now only my fingerprints could disable the alarm and open the front door. I made key cards for Oliver and Rachel that I could deactivate at any time. When they discovered the changes, their reaction was predictable. Oliver looked hurt, and Rachel looked angry, even though she tried to hide it. Dad, why did you do that? Oliver asked during dinner. Don't you trust us? Trust has nothing to do with it, son, I replied. It's just that the old system was outdated. The new one is much more reliable. But why didn't you tell us beforehand? Did Rachel warn me when she changed the code? I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was intently cutting her steak on her plate. That's different, she interjected. I was just concerned about security. Me too, I smiled. Speaking of safety, I noticed that unfamiliar people were starting to show up at the house. Who is this Thorn you were talking to last week? Rachel flinched and dropped her knife. Thorn? Oh, he's just an old friend. He stopped by for literally 5 minutes to drop off some documents. What documents? Nothing important, she shrugged, but I noticed how white her knuckles were as she clenched the napkin. Papers from my previous job. He was my colleague. I knew she was lying, but I decided not to press her. For now. With each passing day, Rachel behaved more and more like the lady of the house. She moved lunchtime from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock because it suited her schedule better. She began planning renovations to the guest bedroom to turn it into a nursery. For the future, as she said, although I was sure that she and Oliver had no plans to have children. But what bothered me most was how my son was changing. Oliver had always been gentle and easygoing, but now he was becoming distant and cold, especially towards me. Whereas before we used to talk regularly over dinner, discussing work, politics, and sports, now he answered in monosyllables, often looked at his phone, and went to his room at the first opportunity. One day when Rachel was out running errands for the whole day, I tried to talk to him. Son, what's going on between us? I feel like you're pulling away. Oliver sighed and put down the book he was reading. Dad, nothing's going on. I just have a lot of work, and I'm tired. It's not just that, I said, sitting down next to him on the sofa. You've changed since you married Rachel. And I'm worried about you. Worried or controlling? He asked suddenly, sharply. You've always tried to control my life. You decided where I should study, who I should be friends with, who I should work for. What? I was stunned. Oliver, I never told you who to be friends with, and you chose your job yourself. Yes, but you always made it clear that you were unhappy with my choice, he said, standing up and nervously shoving his hands into his pockets. You didn't like my girlfriends. You didn't like my job, and now you don't like my wife. It's not about whether I like her or not, I said, standing up too. It's about the fact that she manipulates you, changes you, and I'm not sure she's sincere. See, he almost shouted, you're always like this. You always think you know better, that everyone around you wants to deceive you, use you. Maybe you're the one manipulating me. Maybe you just don't want me to be happy with anyone but you. His words hurt me more deeply than I could have imagined. Did he really think that? Or were these thoughts instilled in him by Rachel? Oliver, I said quietly, I've always wanted only one thing, for you to be happy. And if Rachel makes you happy, I'm glad for you. But that doesn't mean I have to turn a blind eye to what's going on in my house. Your house, your house. He clapped his hands. All I hear from you is, my house, my rules. You know what? Maybe we really should move out. Find a place where you won't tell us how to live. I've never told you how to live, I objected. I'm just asking you to respect my boundaries and my property. Oh, what about the security system? Or the fact that you monitor Rachel's every move? Or the fact that you're digging into her past? You think I don't know you talked to Eben? That was a surprise. How did Oliver find out about my conversation with Eben? Did Rachel have connections in the police? Son, I'm worried about you, I said, trying to remain calm. Rachel isn't who she says she is. Enough! He slammed his fist on the table. I don't want to hear any more of this. Rachel is my wife, and I love her. If you can't accept that, then maybe we really should think about seeing each other less often. He ran out of the room, leaving me alone. I sank back onto the sofa, feeling a strange heaviness in my chest. Was I losing my son? Had Rachel so completely taken over his mind that he was willing to give up his father? The next 2 weeks were a real test. Oliver hardly spoke to me, coming home late and leaving early, avoiding family meals. Rachel, on the other hand, became unusually friendly. She brought me tea to my office, asked about my health, and even offered to help with the company's paperwork, an offer I declined, of course. New people began to appear in the house, Rachel's friends as she introduced them. Gloomy types with cold eyes, they looked around the rooms with some kind of appraising interest. Sometimes I heard snippets of conversation, something about deadlines, plans, money. Once passing by Oliver and Rachel's room, I heard her yelling at someone on the phone. I don't care about your problems, Thorne. You promised to help, so help. The old man suspects we need to speed up the process. The old man was obviously me. And what process were they planning to speed up? I began to notice other disturbing signs. Some documents had disappeared from my safe. Nothing particularly valuable, but the fact that someone had been rummaging through my things was disturbing. Twice I caught Rachel in my office when I was away from home. Juno reported this to me, despite Rachel's protests. Once I returned from the office earlier than usual and found a gathering in the living room. Rachel, Thorne, and 2 other men I hadn't seen before were sitting at the table, spreading out some papers. "Oh, Higgins!" Rachel exclaimed, quickly gathering the documents. "We weren't expecting you so early." "Obviously," I replied dryly. "What's going on here?" "Just a business meeting," she smiled. "Meet my partners on a new project. I told you I was interested in digital marketing." The men nodded but did not introduce themselves. Thorne, tall, with closely cropped graying hair and a scar across his cheek, looked at me with undisguised hostility. "And what kind of project is it?" I asked. "Oh, it's hard to explain." Rachel waved her hand. "Technical details, you know. But if you're interested, I can—" "Don't bother," I interrupted. "I'm just surprised you're holding business meetings in my house without telling me." "Our house," she corrected gently, "and I thought you wouldn't be back until this evening." "We're almost done." I went up to my office, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. Something was brewing, and I had to be ready. The next day, I called my lawyer and changed my will, removing Rachel from it and limiting Oliver's share. I decided to leave the bulk of my estate to a charitable foundation that supported educational programs for children from disadvantaged families. I also made changes to the company's documents, strengthening my control over it and eliminating the possibility of a takeover. In the evening, I had a headache, worse than usual. Rachel noticed and offered me a pill. "I have an excellent remedy for headaches," she said, handing me a glass of water and a small white pill. "This will help you relax." I took the pill, but when she turned away, I discreetly threw it into a flower pot. Something told me not to trust anything Rachel offered. "Thanks, I'm going to get some rest," I said, heading upstairs to the bedroom. During the night, I felt sick again. Severe pain in the left side of my head, numbness in my arm, nausea. I tried to get out of bed, but the room spun before my eyes and I fell. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of the door opening and Rachel's silhouette standing in the doorway. I woke up in the hospital. Bright lights, the beeping of monitors, the smell of antiseptic. Oliver was sitting nearby, pale and worried. When he saw that I had opened my eyes, relief washed over his face. "Dad!" You're awake. He grabbed my hand. The doctor said you had a stroke, but they were able to help you quickly, and you avoided any serious consequences. How, how did I get here? My voice sounded hoarse and weak. Rachel heard a noise coming from your room and found you on the floor. She called an ambulance and did everything necessary until they arrived. The doctor said that if it weren't for her quick reaction, things could have ended much worse. I closed my eyes, trying to collect my thoughts. A stroke? At 67? I had always taken care of my health and had regular checkups. There were no signs of a stroke, unless... Where's Rachel? I asked. She's talking to the doctors, Oliver replied. She's been here the whole time, hasn't left your side. I had no doubt that she hadn't left my side, but her reasons were far from concern for my health. A few minutes later, the door opened and Rachel entered, accompanied by a doctor, a young man with a tired face. Mr. Bowling, I'm glad to see you've regained consciousness, he said, approaching the bed. I'm Dr. Wood. You had a moderate ischemic stroke. We performed thrombolysis, and fortunately, serious damage was avoided. But you will need rehabilitation and constant monitoring. How long was I unconscious? I asked. About 36 hours, the doctor replied. But that's normal in your situation. Your body needed rest. When will I be discharged? Not for at least a week, he noted on his tablet. We need to make sure there are no complications and develop a rehabilitation plan. When the doctor left, Rachel sat down on the edge of the bed and took my hand with such sympathy on her face that I felt uncomfortable. Higgins, you have no idea how scared we were, she said, when I found you on the floor. It was horrible. Thank you for calling the ambulance, I replied, trying to sound grateful. Of course, she smiled. Your family. Oliver and I will take care of you when you come home. I've already discussed a care plan with the doctor. We may need to hire a nurse. A nurse? I frowned. I can take care of myself. Higgins, she patted my arm as if I were an unreasonable child. You've had a stroke. You need constant care. Besides, the doctor said there could be problems with your cognitive functions. You shouldn't stress yourself out and worry about business. Oliver and I will take care of everything. So that's it. Now her plan was clear. A stroke was the perfect excuse to declare me incompetent and take control of my affairs. And considering that lately I've been taking pills for headaches that she gave me. I need to rest, I said, covering my eyes. Of course, dear, Rachel kissed me on the forehead. We'll come back later. In the meantime, I'll talk to your doctors about further treatment. When they left, I opened my eyes and looked out the window. It was raining outside, the drops tapping on the glass, creating a soothing rhythm. I needed to collect my thoughts and come up with a plan of action. I was sure that my stroke was no accident and that Rachel was directly involved, but proving it would be difficult. The main thing now was to prevent her from using my illness to take control of the house and business. To do that, I had to show that I was fully capable and in control of the situation. But I couldn't help thinking about what would happen next. If Rachel was willing to go this far to gain control of my property, what else was she capable of? And how could I protect myself from someone who lived under my roof and had access to everything, including my food and medicine? One thing I was sure of, the battle for my home was just beginning, and this time the stakes were much higher than just real estate. It was my life. I spent 10 days in the hospital. The doctors were surprised at how quickly I recovered. There were no serious consequences from the stroke, no speech impairments, no mobility issues. When Dr. Wood came for his morning rounds on the 4th day, he couldn't hide his surprise. Mr. Bowling, your vitals are excellent, he said, looking over the test results. If I hadn't seen your scans, I would have doubted you ever had a stroke. I've always been in good health, I replied, and I intend to live a long time. Rachel visited me every day, always with flowers and fruit. She played the role of the caring sister-in-law so convincingly that the nurses were touched when they saw her. Oliver came less often. Work, he explained. But I could see that he was avoiding me. Perhaps he felt guilty about our last conversation. Or maybe he just didn't know how to behave. On the 5th day, Rachel showed up with a folder of documents. Higgins, I talked to a lawyer, she said, settling into a chair next to my bed. Given your condition, it would be wise to set up a power of attorney. That way, Oliver and I can help you until you're fully recovered. She handed me the folder. Inside was a multi-page document, a general power of attorney giving Rachel and Oliver the right to dispose of all my property, including my house and company. We can sign it right now, she smiled, handing me a pen. I've invited a notary. He's waiting in the hallway. I slowly leafed through the document, pretending to carefully study each point. In fact, I didn't need to read it. I already understood that it would mean a complete loss of control over everything I had created. You know, Rachel, I said, closing the folder, I think it's better to wait until I'm discharged. I want my personal lawyer to review the documents. Her smile faded slightly. But why wait? The sooner we get the paperwork done, the sooner we can take some of your worries off your hands. You need to focus on getting better. And I will, I smiled. But important decisions like this can't be made in a rush. Besides, the doctors say I'm recovering faster than expected. Rachel paused, tapping her fingernails on the armrest of her chair. As you say, she finally said, but promise me you'll think about it. Oliver and I just want to help. When she left, I called my lawyer, Norman Pitt. We had worked together for over 20 years, and I trusted him completely. Norman, I need your help, I said, making sure no one could overhear our conversation. And a private investigator. A good one. During the rest of my stay in the hospital, I focused on gathering information. Under the pretext of boredom, I asked Oliver to bring me my laptop. I wanted to watch the news and read. In reality, I was checking my accounts, company documents, and home security camera footage. By the time I was discharged, I had enough information to understand the scale of Rachel's plans. She didn't just want to control my house, she planned to take over my business completely. And, apparently, she had serious debts to people who were better left alone. The detective hired by Norman dug up some interesting details. Before becoming Rachel Frost, my sister-in-law had changed her identity at least twice. Under the name Verna Lloyd, she was involved in real estate fraud in 3 states. And before that, as Catherine Moss, she participated in a scheme involving shell companies that were used to launder drug cartel money. Thorne, her business partner, had a criminal record for extortion and aggravated assault. On the day of discharge, Oliver came to pick me up in his car. Rachel stayed home to cook a festive dinner in honor of your return, as my son explained. She tried very hard, Dad, Oliver said as we drove home. All she's done the last few days is prepare for your arrival. She rearranged the furniture in the living room to make it easier for you to move around and hired a nurse who will come every day. That's very nice of her, I replied, looking out the window at the houses passing by. Dad, I know you and Rachel have had your differences, Oliver sighed, but she really wants to help. And so do I. After what happened, I realized how important it is to take care of each other. I looked at my son. I saw genuine concern in his eyes, and for a moment I felt a pang of regret. Oliver truly believed that Rachel cared about me. He didn't see, or didn't want to see, her true motives. I appreciate your concern, son, I said. I do. As we pulled up to the house, I noticed several unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Do we have guests? I asked. Yes, Rachel invited some of your friends, Oliver replied, and a couple of her friends who helped her with the preparations. Friends? That was strange. I don't have many close friends, and Rachel only knew a few of them. When we entered the house, Rachel greeted us in the hall with a beaming smile. Welcome home, Higgins. She hugged me with feigned warmth. We're so glad you're back. Voices and laughter came from the living room. I walked in and saw about 10 people gathered around a set table. I recognized only 2 of them. Eben Worths, my friend from the police, and Norman Pitt, my lawyer. The rest were complete strangers. Higgins! Evans came over and shook my hand firmly. Glad to see you on your feet, old devil. I'm glad to see you too, I replied, looking him intently in the eyes. A slight nod from Evans confirmed that everything was as we had agreed. Rachel led me to the chair at the head of the table. My old chair, which now stood in a new place. Sit down, relax, she said. You must be tired from your journey. I sat down looking around at the guests. Among them was Thorne, standing by the window with a glass in his hand, watching the proceedings with a kind of grim satisfaction. So, Rachel clapped her hands to get everyone's attention, I want to propose a toast to Higgins's return home. We were all very worried about you. The guests raised their glasses. I noticed that some of them exchanged meaningful glances. After the toast, Rachel spoke again. I would like to take this opportunity to announce some changes that Oliver and I have decided to make in the organization of our family life. Given Higgins' health, We believe he should be relieved of the burden of managing the house and business. Therefore, we are taking on these responsibilities ourselves. She turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Higgins, you need to focus on your recovery. Oliver and I will take care of everything else. The room fell silent. Oliver looked surprised. It seemed Rachel hadn't discussed these changes with him. Ebb and Norman remained impassive, but I could see their shoulders tense. That's very thoughtful of you, Rachel, I said calmly, but I feel fine and am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. But the doctors said, she began. The doctors said I'm recovering remarkably quickly, I interrupted, and they found no cognitive impairment. Rachel lost her composure for a moment. Irritation flashed in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. Of course, that's wonderful, she said, but you still need to take care of yourself. Stress can cause a relapse. Thanks for your concern, I smiled, but I'll follow the doctor's recommendations, not your assumptions. Rachel exchanged glances with Thorne, who nodded slightly. She straightened up and took a deep breath. Higgins, I think we need to have a frank conversation, she said in a tone that suddenly became harsh. Your stubbornness is not good for you or your family. You've had a serious illness and you need help, whether you want it or not. What kind of help? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Managing the house and the business. She waved her hand. It's too much for someone your age and in your health. Rachel. Oliver tried to intervene, but she ignored him. You are no longer the master of this house, she declared with such force that all the guests froze. You need to accept this and let us take care of you. Here it was, the moment I had been waiting for. Rachel finally showed her true colors. Not the master? I asked with a smile. And who do you think is the master? Oliver and I, she crossed her arms over her chest. We are young, energetic, and full of ideas for growing your business. Dad, that's not true, Oliver began, but Rachel interrupted him. Be quiet, Oliver. We've discussed this. No, we haven't, he objected, blushing. You didn't tell me anything about taking over my father's business. Because you're too soft, she snapped. You always have been. If I waited for you to pluck up the courage, we'd never get anything done. I leaned back in my chair, watching the scene unfold. It was even better than I had planned. Rachel was destroying her own game. So, Rachel, I said when she finished lecturing Oliver, you want to control my home and my business? And then what? Sell everything and give the money to your friends? I nodded toward Thorne. Her eyes widened. I don't understand what you're talking about. I think you understand perfectly well, I said, slowly rising from my chair. But let me clarify the situation for everyone here. I nodded to Norman, and he took a folder of documents out of his briefcase. I've been gathering information for the past few weeks, I continued, about you, your plans, your partners. And you know what I found out? That Rachel Frost isn't your real name. That you were previously known as Verna Lloyd and Catherine Moss. That you have criminal convictions for fraud in 3 states. Rachel turned pale, but didn't back down. That's a lie, she hissed. You're trying to discredit me because you can't accept that your time is up. Really? I raised an eyebrow questioningly. Eben, would you like to tell us about the results of your investigation? My friend rose from his seat. As a police officer, I can confirm that everything Higgins said is true, he said. Rachel Frost, also known as Verna Lloyd and Catherine Moss, is wanted in Arizona and Nevada for real estate fraud. In addition, we have reason to believe that she is involved in money laundering through shell companies. Oliver looked at his wife with an expression of shock and disbelief. Rachel, is this true? He asked in a trembling voice. Of course not, she laughed, but the laughter sounded forced. They're just trying to destroy our family. Your father has always been controlling. He can't accept that you love someone other than him. What about this? I took a flash drive out of my pocket and handed it to Norman, who plugged it into his laptop. The screen showed CCTV footage. Rachel in my office, copying documents. Rachel talking to Thorne about the old man and how to gain control of the house. Rachel slipping something into my evening tea the day before my stroke. This is fake, she muttered, but without her previous confidence. What about this? I nodded to Norman, and he opened another file, a copy of an email from Rachel to someone named Boss, in which she discussed a plan to take control of my company. Also fake? Rachel was silent, her gaze darting around the room as if looking for a way out. And lastly, I took a small vial out of my pocket. These are the pills you gave me for my headache. I had them analyzed. Do you know what's in them? A substance that causes vasoconstriction and increases blood pressure, perfect for provoking a stroke in a man my age. A heavy silence hung in the room. Oliver sat with his face covered by his hands. Thorne tensed, his hand twitching toward his jacket's inside pocket, but Eben was already standing next to him, his hand on his shoulder. I wouldn't recommend it, Eben said quietly. There are more of us here. Rachel finally came to her senses, her face contorted with rage. You won't prove anything, she hissed. It's all slander. And even if you do have some kind of evidence, do you think you can defend yourself? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do, I smiled. Your boss is Harlan Greer, known in certain circles as the Spider. He uses people like you to take over businesses through front men. But this time you've miscalculated. All the evidence has already been handed over to the FBI, including information on Greer's whereabouts. Rachel's face turned pale. You're bluffing, she whispered. Check it out. I nodded toward my phone on the table. Call him. She grabbed the phone and dialed the number. After a few rings, the voicemail kicked in. Rachel tried again, with the same result. The agents took him 2 hours ago, I said, along with most of his organization. The operation had been in the works for several weeks. Rachel slumped into a chair, her shoulders slumped. Suddenly, she looked much older than her 28 years. What now? She asked quietly. Are you going to turn me into the police? I looked at Ebb, who was still keeping Thorne under control. Mr. Thorne is definitely going to prison, I said. He has too many unsolved cases. As for you, that depends on Oliver. I turned to my son. The choice is yours, son. You can defend her if you want, but I hope you finally see who she really is. Oliver raised his head. There were tears in his eyes, but his gaze was firm. I've seen enough, he said, looking at Rachel. You used me. You tried to kill my father. I don't know who you are. Rachel tried to take his hand, but he pulled it away. Oliver, sweetheart, you don't understand, she began. I did it for us. For our future? For us? He smiled bitterly. You did it for yourself. And for your boss. But definitely not for me. I walked over to Rachel and put my hand on her shoulder. Pack your things, I said. You have an hour. After that, I don't want to see you in my house. You can't just kick me out, she protested. I have rights. I'm your son's wife. Not for long, Oliver replied. I'm filing for divorce. And I completely agree with my father. You don't belong here. Rachel stood up, her eyes flashing. You'll both regret this, she hissed. No one treats Rachel Frost like that. You mean Verna Lloyd? Or Catherine Moss? I asked with a smile. It doesn't matter. You have 59 minutes. Rachel turned and stormed out of the room. Eben nodded to his two colleagues, who followed her to make sure she took nothing but her personal belongings. Thorne led away two other police officers who had been inconspicuously present among the guests all along. Rachel's other friends hurried to take their leave, muttering awkward apologies. When only Oliver, Eben, Norman, and I remained in the living room, my son came up to me and hugged me tightly. Dad, I'm such an idiot, he whispered. How could I not have seen it? She's a professional, son. I patted him on the back. People like her are trained to manipulate others. But I should have noticed the changes in your health after her pills. I should have realized she was up to something. You loved her, I sighed. Love often blinds you. Oliver pulled away, wiping his eyes. What now? Now we restore order to our home, I replied, and you start a new chapter in your life. Without Rachel. And an hour later, Rachel left my house with 2 suitcases, all I allowed her to take. She didn't look back as she got into the taxi. Her face was stony, but I knew that inside she was seething with rage and humiliation. People like that don't forgive such defeats, but that didn't bother me. I had protected my home and my son, and I was prepared for the battle to continue. After all, I wouldn't have lived to be 67 and built a successful business if I didn't know how to fight for what I believed was mine. I expected that after what had happened, Oliver and I would be able to mend our relationship. It seemed that he had seen Rachel's true colors and realized that I was right about her. That evening, after she left the house, we talked for a long time. Oliver looked depressed but grateful. "I don't know how you figured it out, Dad," he said, sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey. "I was blind." "Life experience, son," I replied. "At my age, you begin to understand people better." We talked late into the night. Oliver asked about the details of the investigation, about how I had gathered evidence against Rachel. I told him everything, except for a few details that might have hurt him even more. The next morning, however, something had changed. Oliver came down to breakfast looking gloomy, avoiding my gaze. He barely touched his food, answered in monosyllables, and hurried away citing work. I chalked it up to emotional turmoil. After all, it's not every day you find out that your wife tried to kill your father. But the same thing happened again that evening, and the next day. Oliver became increasingly distant, spending as little time at home as possible, and when he did show up, he was cold and aloof. On the fourth day, I decided to talk to him directly. "Son, what's going on?" I asked when he came home from work and tried to go straight up to his room. "You're avoiding me." Oliver stopped on the stairs without turning around. "Nothing's going on, Dad. I'm just tired." 4 days in a row? I moved closer. "Did something happen at work? Or is it Rachel?" At the mention of her name, his shoulders tensed. "I don't want to talk about it." "What? Work or Rachel?" He turned abruptly, and I saw a mixture of pain and anger in his eyes. "Rachel, you! This whole situation!" he blurted out. "Are you satisfied? You destroyed my marriage, humiliated my wife in front of everyone, made me look like a complete idiot, and now you want me to pretend everything is fine?" I was stunned by his words. "Oliver, I didn't ruin your marriage. Rachel tried to kill me. She was cheating on you from the beginning." "That's what you say," he said, stepping down a few steps. "But I talked to her. She told me her side of the story. I felt myself go cold inside." "You saw her?" "When?" "Yesterday and the day before." He crossed his arms over his chest. "She's staying at a motel outside of town. Alone, abandoned, penniless. And of course, she said I set it all up." I shook my head. "That I fabricated evidence because I wanted to break you two up." "Isn't that true?" His eyes were defiant. "You never approved of any of my girlfriends. You always found fault with them. Rachel says you hired these people to stage this whole thing, that the videos are fake." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Oliver, think logically. Why would I do that? I had a stroke. The doctors confirmed it. Do you think I caused it myself?" "The doctors confirmed that you had a stroke, but not the cause," he objected. "It could have been a coincidence. And you used the situation to discredit Rachel." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Had Rachel manipulated him that well? Or was the problem deeper, in our relationship with our son? "Son, I showed you the evidence. The camera recordings, the letters, the results of the pill analysis." Eben confirmed her criminal past. "Eben has been your friend for 30 years, Oliver shrugged. "Of course he'll confirm everything you say. So you believe Rachel, a woman you've known for less than a year, over your own father?" "I believe what I see," he paused. "And what I see is that you've always tried to control my life. You always knew better. You were always sure that everyone around you wanted to use you or your money. Because that was often the case." I raised my voice, losing my patience. "Do you think it's easy to build a business from scratch? Do you think I didn't see people trying to cheat me, use me, steal what I had created?" "See?" Oliver smiled bitterly. "There you go. Always about you, your business, your money. Never about what I want." "What do you want, Oliver?" I asked quietly. "For your wife to poison your father and steal his company?" "I want you to stop treating me like a child," he almost shouted. "I want you to recognize that I can make my own decisions, that my life is my life." We stood facing each other, separated not only by the steps of the staircase, but by something much deeper. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Or maybe I was seeing him for the first time. Not the way I wanted to see him all these years. "Oliver," I finally said, "if you really believe I'm capable of something as despicable as fabricating evidence against your wife, then maybe it really is better if we don't see each other for a while." He nodded as if that was all he had been waiting for. "I thought so," he said. "I'm packing my things. I'm leaving tomorrow." "Where?" "To Rachel's. We'll rent an apartment." "Son, think again." I took a step toward him. "She's dangerous. She's involved with criminals." "Those are your words, Dad." He shook his head. "And I don't believe them anymore." With that, he climbed the stairs and disappeared into his room. I stood at the bottom, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from under my feet. The next morning, Oliver packed his things and left without saying goodbye. I found out from Juno, who said that the young master left in a taxi around 8 in the morning. A week has passed since then, but there has been no call or message from him. The house suddenly seemed huge and empty. I wandered around the rooms, unable to find my place. Work did not bring the usual satisfaction. Even my beloved garden, where I usually found peace, now only evoked bitter thoughts. I replayed our conversation with Oliver over and over in my head, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. Was he right? Had I always tried to control his life? Had I prevented him from making his own decisions? My memories provided conflicting answers. Yes, I paid for his education, but I left the choice of major up to him. Yes, I helped him get his first job, but he advanced on his own. Yes, I never hid my opinion about his girlfriends, but I never forbade him from dating anyone. But maybe it wasn't about specific actions, but about attitude. Maybe I really did pressure him with my authority, my success, my confidence that I knew best. I remembered how Oliver always tried to please me when he was a child, how happy he was when I praised him, how upset he was when I was dissatisfied. I thought I was encouraging his desire for perfection, but maybe I was just making him dependent on my approval. 10 days after Oliver left, I received a short message from him. "Rachel and I have rented an apartment. The address is 123 Pine Street, apartment 15. Don't come. I need time." I didn't reply. What could I say? Convince him of the danger Rachel posed? He didn't want to hear it. Ask for forgiveness? For what? For saving his life? Or for the years when I may have been too demanding as a father? Instead, I called Evans and asked him to check the address. Not to interfere in my son's life, but to make sure Rachel wasn't dragging him into new dangerous schemes. "Nothing special," Eben reported a couple of days later. "Just a regular apartment building. They really do live there. Rachel isn't contacting her old acquaintances, at least not the ones we're tracking. It looks like she's laying low for now." "For now," I repeated. "So you don't think she's given up on her plans either?" "Higgins, people like that don't change," Evans sighed. "They just adapt. I'd be careful if I were you." I took his advice. I increased security at home, changed all passwords and access codes to company systems, and audited all current projects. I also hired a private investigator to watch Rachel and Oliver, not to interfere, just to observe. The investigator, Lamont Pierce, reported twice a week. According to him, Oliver was going to work, and Rachel was spending most of her time at home or at nearby stores. Nothing suspicious. But 3 weeks after Oliver's departure, the situation changed. Lamont reported that Rachel had started meeting with people associated with Harlan Greer, the boss who had been arrested by the FBI. Not with his closest associates, who had also been arrested, but with peripheral figures who remained at large. "They're cautious," Lamont said on the phone. "They meet in public places and don't talk much." But I saw her hand, one of them, a folder with documents. What documents? I couldn't see, but judging by how carefully he handled it, something important. A few days later, the strange calls began. First to the company office, anonymous threats, demands to return what belongs to them. Then to my home, silence on the line, sometimes heavy breathing. I changed all my numbers, but the calls continued. One morning, I found a dead bird on the porch. It was an ordinary city pigeon, but its throat had been cut. The message was clear. I increased security and hired a bodyguard, a former Marine named Quentin Mills. He accompanied me everywhere, checked my car before every trip, and inspected my house when I returned. Meanwhile, Lamont reported that Rachel was increasingly leaving the house without Oliver. Once, he followed her to a motel on the outskirts of town, where she met with a man Lamont identified as Lester Shaw, a lawyer known for representing major criminal organizations. They spent about 2 hours in the room, the detective reported. When they left, they both looked happy. She was smiling. That alarmed me. Rachel was clearly planning something, and judging by her confidence, it was a good plan. A month after Oliver left, I received an official letter from the law firm Shaw, Burke and Partners. It stated that Mrs. Rachel Bowling was filing a petition to have me declared incompetent due to the effects of my stroke and was requesting that Oliver Bowling be appointed guardian of my property. Attached to the letter were copies of medical records confirming the stroke, as well as a report by a Dr. Phelps stating that such conditions often lead to cognitive impairments that the patient may not be aware of. There were also statements from witnesses who claimed that they had recently noticed signs of disorientation, forgetfulness, and unfounded suspicion in me. I immediately contacted Norman, my lawyer. They won't be able to win this case, he said confidently after reviewing the documents. They have no real evidence of your incapacity. Besides, your doctors will confirm that you have fully recovered from your stroke. It's not about winning, Norman, I said. Rachel knows full well that the court will most likely dismiss the case, but the process itself could drag on for months. All that time there will be talk, rumors. It could affect the business, relationships with partners. You're right, Norman nodded. It's a pressure tactic. They want you to settle, maybe offer them money to drop the suit. Exactly, I leaned back in my chair. And the worst part is that Oliver supports it. His signature is on the documents. That was the most painful part. My own son didn't just leave me for a woman who tried to kill me. He actively helped her in her attempts to take away everything I had built. That evening, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about my life, about the decisions that had led me to this moment. Where did I go wrong with Oliver? When did I lose his trust? Or had he always been this way? Weak, easily influenced, willing to betray even his own father for the sake of a woman who manipulated him. I remember teaching him to ride a bike. He was 6 and afraid of falling. I ran alongside him, holding the bike, promising I wouldn't let go. And then, when he picked up speed and confidence, I let go. He rode a few meters on his own before he realized it, turned around with an enthusiastic, "Dad, look," and fell. Not hard, just tipped over on his side. But his face when he got up, not pain, not resentment at the fall, disappointment. "You promised not to let go," he said then. Maybe that's what it's all about? Maybe I let go too soon at some important moments? Or on the contrary, did I hold on too tightly when I should have given him freedom? Maybe he's right, and I really did try to control his life, not letting him bump his head and learn from his own mistakes. Lamont's call interrupted my thoughts. "Mr. Bowling, we have a problem," he said without preamble. "Rachel met today with a man we suspect of having ties to a drug cartel. His name is Diego Solis. He arrived in Orland yesterday and is staying at the Ritz-Carlton. What do you know about him?" "Not as much as I'd like. Officially, he's a businessman who imports textiles from South America. Unofficially, he launders money for the cartel and sometimes solves their problems, using radical methods." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Do you think she hired him to—" "I don't know," Lamont interrupted, "but if I were you, I'd be extremely careful. And maybe leave town for a while." I thanked him for the information and hung up. Leave? No, that's not my style. I've never run away from problems. And I wasn't about to start now. Instead, I called Eben and told him about the situation. "Damn, Higgins, this is serious," he said. "Solis is not someone to mess with. If he's here for you, is there anything you can do?" "Officially, no. We have no grounds to detain him, but I can arrange surveillance and maybe find a reason to check his documents and luggage." "Thanks, buddy. In the meantime, beef up security and be prepared for the unexpected." I followed his advice. Quentin brought in 2 more of his colleagues. They installed additional cameras around the house, checked all entrances and exits, and developed an evacuation plan in case of danger. But the most unexpected news came the next morning. Lamont reported that Oliver had moved out of his apartment on Pine Street. "Last night around 10, the detective clarified. "He packed his things and left. Judging by the amount of luggage, for good." "Where did he go?" "I don't know. I was following Rachel, not him. She stayed in the apartment." "Did they have a fight?" "Possibly." The neighbors heard a loud argument shortly before he left. That was interesting. Had Oliver finally seen the light? Or had something else happened between them? I wanted to call my son, but I held back. If he really left Rachel, he would contact me when he was ready. And if not, well, an extra call wouldn't change anything. All day I was on pins and needles waiting for a call from Oliver, or from Rachel, or some news from Lamont or Evans. But the phone remained silent. In the evening, just as I was about to go to bed, the doorbell rang. Quentin, who was on duty in the hall, announced over the intercom, "Mr. Bowling, your son is here." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Is he alone?" "Yes, sir." I checked. "There's no one else here." "Let him in." I went down to the lobby just as Oliver crossed the threshold. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, in rumpled clothes. "Dad," he said quietly, "we need to talk. Rachel is planning something terrible, and I can't keep quiet about it anymore." I led Oliver into my study, away from prying ears. Quentin stayed in the hall, close enough to help if needed, but far enough away that he couldn't hear our conversation. I didn't think my son was dangerous, but after everything that had happened, I preferred to be cautious. Oliver didn't just look tired. He was exhausted, physically and emotionally. As he sank into a chair, I noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. "Would you like something to drink?" I asked, walking over to the bar. "Whiskey, if you please," he replied. "Double." I poured him a whiskey and myself a brandy and sat down opposite him. "So, you said Rachel is planning something terrible." Oliver took a big gulp, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. "I was such a fool, Dad," he finally said. "Such a blind, trusting idiot. You were right about her from the start." "What happened?" "Last night I came home earlier than usual. I had a headache and took the day off work. Rachel wasn't expecting me. She was talking on the phone in the bedroom. The door was open. I heard—" He paused as if it were difficult for him to say the next words. "I heard her discussing a plan to kill you with someone." I felt a chill down my spine, but I tried to keep a calm expression on my face. "Are you sure you heard that right? Maybe it was a movie or—" "No, Dad," he shook his head. "I heard everything clearly. She said that the old man needs to be taken care of for good. That it didn't work last time, but now everything will be different. She mentioned someone named Diego who knows his business and won't leave any traces. And she talked about money, a lot of money that had to be paid for the job. So my fears were confirmed. Solis had indeed been hired to eliminate me." "What did you do when you heard that?" "Nothing at first." Oliver looked away. "I was in shock. I quietly left the apartment, went downstairs, and just sat in the car, trying to make sense of what I had heard. 2 hours later, I came back, pretending I had just arrived. Rachel acted as usual, asked about my day, and made dinner." He took another sip of whiskey. "I couldn't look her in the eye. I couldn't pretend. At some point, she noticed that something was wrong and started asking questions. I lost it. I told her I had heard her conversation. At first, she tried to deny everything, saying that I had misunderstood, that it was a conversation about some movie. But I didn't back down. And then she changed tactics," I finished for him. "Yes," he nodded. "Suddenly she became completely different, cold, calculating. She said that I had always been just a means to an end for her, that she needed your money, your business, that I was too weak and stupid to see the truth." There were tears in his eyes, not from grief, but from rage and humiliation. When I said I would report her to the police, she laughed. She said she had connections everywhere, that she had compromising information on me too, that I had signed several documents without reading them and was now also involved in her schemes, and that if I went to the police, I would end up behind bars myself. "What documents did you sign?" I asked, feeling anxiety rising inside me. Oliver covered his face with his hands. "I don't know exactly. She brought some papers, said they were for opening a joint account, for renting an apartment, for insurance. I trusted her and signed without reading them carefully." I suppressed a sigh. It was a typical scam. Get the victim to sign documents without explaining their true content. "We'll figure it out," I said. "I have good lawyers. But first, tell me what happened next. How did you get away from her?" "We had a big fight. She threatened me. I yelled at her. At some point, I just started packing my things. She tried to stop me, but I was determined. Before I left, she said, he swallowed. She said I would regret it, that she would get to you anyway and then she would come after me. I stood up, walked over to my son, and put my hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing coming to me. Now we'll figure this situation out together. I'm sorry, Dad. His voice trembled. I should have believed you from the beginning. I should have seen her for who she really is. Don't blame yourself, I squeezed his shoulder. Rachel is a professional manipulator. She knows how to find weak spots and exploit them. We talked until almost dawn. Oliver told me everything he knew about Rachel's plans, the people she was meeting with, the conversations he had overheard. Gradually, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. It turned out that Oliver's financial situation was much worse than I had imagined. During his marriage to Rachel, he had incurred enormous debts. At first, it was small loans for urgent needs, as Rachel explained. Then the amounts grew. She convinced him to take out several loans, pawn his car, and even withdraw money from his retirement account. Where did all that money go? I asked, stunned by the scale of the problem. I don't know exactly, Oliver shook his head. Rachel talked about some investments, business opportunities. She promised that it would all pay off with interest soon. I believed her. What about your job? Didn't they notice any problems there? I quit 3 months ago, he admitted, not looking me in the eye. Rachel said she found me a better opportunity, some startup with huge potential. I was supposed to get a stake in the company. I invested my last savings in it. But of course, there was no startup. I was shocked. My son, with his education and experience, had allowed himself to be drawn into such an obvious scam. How could he have been so gullible? But all I said out loud was, we'll get through this. The most important thing right now is your safety and mine. In the morning, I called Eb and told him about the new circumstances. He promised to increase surveillance on Rachel and check Solace more thoroughly. If he's really planning a murder, we'll find evidence, Eb assured me. But be careful. People like that don't leave witnesses. Then I contacted Norman and explained the situation with the documents Oliver had signed. We need to find out exactly what he signed, Norman said. If it's a forged signature or he was misled about the content of the documents, we can challenge their legal validity. Oliver stayed at my house. I gave him a room in the far wing, away from the entrance, and assigned one of the guards to watch over him. My son was depressed and confused, spending most of his time in his room, avoiding conversation. I didn't pressure him. I understood that he needed time to process what had happened and accept his mistakes. But at the same time, I couldn't help thinking that we had a serious conversation about the future ahead of us, about how he had allowed Rachel to manipulate him, about his financial irresponsibility, about our mutual distrust. 2 days after Oliver's return, Lamont reported that Rachel had moved out of the apartment on Pine Street. She disappeared during the night, said the detective. She took all her belongings. The neighbors didn't see anything. Where did she go? I asked. I don't know yet. My people are checking hotels and rental apartments in the city, but she could have left Orlando. That was unlikely. Rachel is not the type to back down. If she hired Solis to kill me, she would stay nearby to make sure the job was done. I decided it was time to take more decisive action. If Rachel was in hiding, it meant she was preparing for something serious. I had to get ahead of her. The first thing I did was contact my sister Iris, who lived in Chicago. We weren't particularly close. We saw each other once a year at Christmas and sometimes talked on the phone during the holidays. But I knew that Rachel had met with her several times and was trying to improve their relationship. Higgins? Iris was surprised to hear my voice. What's going on? You never call just to call. I need to ask you about Rachel, I said without preamble. Oliver's wife. Have you been in touch with her lately? Yes, she called a couple of days ago, my sister replied. She was very upset. She said you kicked her out of the house, that Oliver, under your influence, had also turned away from her, that you've had problems with your memory and perception since your stroke, but you refused to admit it. So Rachel was trying to turn me and other family members against her. A typical manipulator's tactic is to isolate the victim, to deprive them of the support of their loved ones. Iris, what she's saying is a lie, I said. In reality, Rachel tried to take control of my home and business. She even tried to hurt me. What are you talking about? My sister's voice sounded incredulous. Rachel seems so sincere, so caring. It's all an act, I sighed. Listen, I need you to be careful. Don't talk to her. Don't tell her anything about yourself or your family. She's dangerous. Higgins, are you sure you're okay? Iris's voice now sounded concerned. Maybe you should see a doctor. After a stroke, there can be... I'm perfectly fine, I interrupted. And the stroke wasn't accidental. Rachel slipped something into my medication. I have proof. My God, Iris gasped. Are you serious? Absolutely. And right now, she may be cooking up something even more terrible. So I'm asking you to be careful. And if she contacts you again, let me know immediately. After talking to my sister, I called my cousin Perry, who lived in Seattle, and his daughter Lindsay, my niece. Both confirmed that Rachel had contacted them, telling them stories about my illness and paranoia. Perry was even planning to come to Orland to help resolve the family conflict. She's very convincing, Perry said. She spoke with such sincere concern about you, about how you refuse to acknowledge the problem. That's part of her plan, I explained. She wants everyone around me to think I'm incompetent. That way it will be easier for her to take control of my assets. By evening, I had called all the relatives with whom I had any kind of relationship. The picture was bleak. Rachel had contacted almost everyone, telling the same story about my deteriorating condition and how she and Oliver were just trying to help. Some believed her completely, others were skeptical, but all were concerned. Rachel was skilled at sowing seeds of doubt. If it hadn't been for my call, many might have taken her side. The next day, Evans brought news about Solis. We conducted a discreet search of his hotel room, he reported. We found a gun with a silencer, fake documents, and a large amount of cash. We also found photos of your house, travel itineraries, even security system diagrams. Damn, I cursed. He really is planning to kill someone. It looks that way, but the good news is that now we have grounds to arrest him. We picked him up this morning as he was leaving the hotel. Did he say anything? Did he admit that Rachel hired him? He's keeping quiet for now. He's demanding a lawyer, but we found messages on his phone from someone named RF, discussing the job and payment. That's not enough to charge Rachel, but we're continuing to investigate. I thanked Deb and hung up. The situation was getting more serious. Rachel didn't just want to control my business, she was willing to kill me for it. And apparently she had serious connections in the criminal world. Meanwhile, Norman found out something about the documents Oliver had signed. It turned out that among them were powers of attorney to manage my property in the event of my death or incapacity, as well as several large loans agreements where Oliver acted as guarantor. The good news is that most of these documents have legal flaws, Norman said. They were drafted hastily with violations. We can challenge them in court. And the bad news? The bad news is that Oliver did sign them, and if Rachel decides to use them against him, he could have some legal problems. Nothing serious but unpleasant. I told Oliver everything. He was depressed but not surprised. I knew she was using me, he said quietly. I just didn't want to admit it. It was easier to believe her lies than to admit I was such a fool. You're not a fool, I objected. You're a trusting person who met a professional con artist. It could have happened to anyone. But not you, he smiled bitterly. You saw through her right away. I have more life experience, I shrugged. And I wasn't in love with her. Oliver was silent for a long time, staring out the window. You know what's the worst part? He finally said. I still miss her. The person she pretended to be. Sometimes I wake up and forget for a second that it was all a lie. I put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't know what to say. No words could heal the wound Rachel had left in his soul. That evening, while watching the news, I came across a small report about a fire in one of the neighborhoods of Orland. The apartment on Pine Street, the one where Oliver and Rachel had lived, had burned to the ground. According to preliminary data, the cause of the fire was a short circuit, the reporter said. I didn't believe in such coincidences. Rachel had covered her tracks, destroying everything that could connect her to that place. The next day, Lamont reported that he had found Rachel. She was staying at a small motel on the outskirts of town, registered under the name Linda Burke. She's not alone, the detective added. She's with a man, about 40 years old, well-dressed with an expensive car. I checked the license plate. The The car is rented in the name of James Courtney, but I'm sure that's an alias. Can you take a photo of this man? Already did. I'm sending it to you. When I received the photo, I recognized the man immediately. It was Lester Shaw, the lawyer representing criminal groups, the man who filed the lawsuit to have me declared incompetent. So Rachel hadn't given up on her plan. Perhaps now that Solis had been arrested, she was looking for another way to get to me. And judging by the fact that she was meeting with a lawyer, that way was legal. I decided to call a family meeting. I invited Iris, Perry, and his daughter Lindsay, as well as several other relatives with whom I was in contact. I explained that I wanted to clarify the situation with Rachel and dispel any doubts about my health. Have them come on Saturday, I told Oliver. We'll tell them everything and show them the evidence. Then Rachel won't be able to use it against us. Do you think they'll believe us? My son asked doubtfully. Rachel is very convincing. They'll believe us when they see the facts, I was sure. We have evidence of her fraud, attempted poisoning, and ties to the criminal world. No one in their right mind would take her side after that. We agreed that the meeting would take place on Saturday at noon. I asked Quentin to increase security at the house for that day. I didn't want to risk the safety of my relatives. All that remained was to wait and hope that Rachel would not take any action before Saturday. I felt that the denouement was approaching, and I was prepared for it to be difficult. Saturday dawned with the piercing clarity of an autumn day. The sun shone through a light haze, promising a warm day, although there was already a chill in the morning air. I got up early as usual and looked out the window for a long time at my garden, where Hayden, the gardener, was trimming the hedge. It was a familiar Saturday morning scene, but today everything was different. Today, many things were to be decided. By 10 o'clock, the house was ready to receive guests. Juno arranged chairs in the living room and prepared light snacks and drinks. Quentin positioned his people around the perimeter of the house and instructed them about possible trouble. I prepared all the materials for the presentation: documents, photographs, video recordings. Oliver, pale and nervous, checked his part of the presentation. Are you sure you can do this? I asked, watching him reread his notes for the third time. Yes, he nodded without looking up. I have to do this, for myself and for them, so they understand how dangerous she is. The relatives began to arrive around 11. Iris was the first to arrive, a fit, elegant woman of 64, my younger sister. She hugged me with unexpected warmth. I spoke to your doctor, Higgins, she said. He assured me that you have no cognitive impairment. I'm sorry I doubted you. It's okay, Iris, I smiled. Rachel can be persuasive. Then Perry arrived with his daughter Lindsay, my nephew Brock, my cousin Delia, and several other relatives. 11 people gathered in total, our entire small family. Everyone was intrigued and a little alarmed by the mysterious invitation. At noon, when everyone was seated in the living room, I stood before them, ready to begin my story. Oliver sat slightly apart, nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest of his chair. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know many of you are surprised by this sudden gathering, but Oliver and I have good reasons for bringing you all here. This is about Rachel, Oliver's wife, and the situation surrounding her. I paused, looking at the faces of my relatives. Some looked puzzled, others concerned. In recent weeks, many of you have received calls or messages from Rachel. She told you about my allegedly deteriorating health, memory problems, and paranoia. All of this is a lie. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Perry sat up straight in his chair, looking at me intently. Higgins, Rachel did call me, he said. She seemed genuinely concerned. She said you kicked her out of the house because of unfounded suspicions. I didn't kick her out because of suspicions, Perry. I shook my head. I kicked her out because of evidence. Evidence that she tried to poison me in order to take control of my home and business. Now the room was completely silent. All eyes were on me. That's a serious accusation, Iris said slowly. Do you have this evidence? Yes, I nodded. And now I'll show it to you. For the next half hour, I told the story of how we met Rachel, her move into my house, and the first signs that she wasn't who she claimed to be. I showed them CCTV footage of her rummaging through my documents, the results of tests on the pills she gave me for headaches, which contained substances that could cause a stroke. Then I gave the floor to Oliver. He stood up, pale but determined, and talked about his experience living with Rachel after they moved out of my place, about how she manipulated him, forced him to sign documents, and got him into debt. And finally about the conversation he overheard, the conversation about plans to kill me. When he finished, the room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "My God," Lindsay whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. "That's awful." "But that's not all," I continued. "We investigated Rachel's past, and what we discovered is even more shocking than her actions here." I told them that Rachel Frost was not my sister-in-law's real name, that she had previously been known as Verna Lloyd, and before that as Catherine Moss, that under these names she had committed fraud, forged documents, and participated in money laundering. And worst of all, under her first known name, Esther Page, she was convicted of attempting to murder her previous husband, a wealthy businessman from Miami. She systematically finds wealthy men, charms them, and then tries to take their money, I concluded, sometimes through manipulation and legal tricks, sometimes through outright violence. I showed Rachel photos of her at different stages of her life, with different hairstyles, hair colors, even facial features altered by makeup or, possibly, minor plastic surgery. She was recognizable in all the photos, but each time she was a slightly different version of herself. The last thing we discovered, I continued, was her connection to a criminal group involved in money laundering through shell companies. She works for a man named Harlan Greer, known in certain circles as the Spider. He uses people like Rachel to take over businesses through front men. I showed photos of Rachel with Thorne, with Solis, with other people connected to Greer. Then I showed them recordings of phone conversations in which she discussed plans to take over my company. When I finished my presentation, the room fell silent. My relatives looked at each other, processing what they had heard. Finally, Perry cleared his throat. "Higgins, if all this is true, that's monstrous. But why didn't you go to the police?" "I did," I replied. "My friend Eben Wartz is an Orland police officer. He helped me gather evidence. What's more, a man named Diego Solis, whom Rachel hired to kill me, was arrested 3 days ago. They found a gun on him, blueprints of my house, and evidence linking him to Rachel." "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Iris asked. "We could have helped." "I didn't want to get you involved," I sighed. "And to be honest, I wasn't sure which of you I could trust. Rachel is very persuasive. She could have influenced one of you, just like she influenced Oliver." My son lowered his head, and I regretted my words. I shouldn't have humiliated him in front of his family. "The important thing," I continued, "is that now you know the truth. And if Rachel contacts any of you again, you'll be prepared. Don't believe anything she says. Don't give her any information about yourself or your family." My relatives nodded, exchanging worried glances. I could see that they were shocked, but they believed me. It was the first step toward restoring security. We continued the discussion, answering questions and clarifying details. Gradually, the tension in the room began to ease. The relatives moved from shock to acceptance, from distrust to understanding. Around 3 in the afternoon, when most of the questions had been asked and answered, the doorbell rang. Quentin, standing at the entrance to the living room, tensed. "Are you expecting anyone else?" he asked quietly. "No," I shook my head. "All the guests are already here." Quentin nodded and went to the door, his hand on the holster under his jacket. A minute later, he returned with a tense expression on his face. "Sir, it's Rachel Frost, and she's not alone. She's with a man who introduced himself as Lester Shaw, a lawyer." I felt a chill run down my spine. Rachel had somehow found out about our meeting and decided to strike first. "What are you going to do?" Oliver asked, coming up to me. I thought for a moment, weighing my options. I could refuse to let them in, but that would only confirm Rachel's story about my paranoia. It was better to meet her face to face, especially now that my family was on my side. "Let them in," I told Quentin, "but be on your guard." Rachel entered the living room with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing. She wore an elegant blue dress, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She looked impeccable, professional, reserved, with an expression of sincere concern on her face. She was followed by Lester Shaw, a tall, thin man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. "Oh," Rachel feigned surprise when she saw the gathering. I didn't know you were having a family reunion. I apologize for intruding. You knew perfectly well, Rachel, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come right now. The question is, how did you find out? She smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she turned to my relatives. I'm so glad to see you all. Iris, Perry, Lindsay, it's so good to have you here. Maybe you can help Higgins understand that he needs help. Help? Iris asked, crossing her arms over her chest. With what exactly? Accepting his condition, Rachel said gently. After his stroke, he began to have problems perceiving reality. He sees conspiracies where there are none and suspects his loved ones of betrayal. These are classic symptoms of post-stroke syndrome, but he refuses to acknowledge it. Interesting, Iris said. How do you explain the fact that the pills you gave him contain substances that contribute to strokes? Rachel froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. That's a ridiculous accusation. She shook her head. I never gave Higgins any pills other than those prescribed by his doctor. What about the fact that you discussed plans to kill him on the phone? Perry asked. Or that you already tried to kill your previous husband, Esther? Or Vern? Or whatever your real name is? Now Rachel was truly confused. She clearly hadn't expected the relatives to already know the truth. Her gaze darted to Oliver, who was standing leaning against the wall, a look of cold determination on his face. Did you tell them? She hissed. You pathetic traitor. No, Rachel, Oliver replied calmly. You're the traitor here. You betrayed my trust, my love. You used me to get to my father and his money. Rachel abruptly changed tactics. Her face contorted with rage, the mask of the caring sister-in-law slipping away. You don't understand anything, she growled. She pointed her finger at me, destroyed our family with his control, his paranoia. He couldn't accept that Oliver loved someone other than him. He fabricated evidence against me, hired detectives, followed me. And he was right to do so, I said calmly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that you hired Diego Solis to kill me. By the way, he's been arrested, and he started talking. It was a half-truth. Solis had indeed been arrested, but he hadn't yet testified against Rachel. However, the bluff worked. She turned pale. That's a lie, she muttered. You have no proof. We have recordings of phone calls, messages on his phone from someone named RF. Photos of you together? I shrugged. More than enough to start an investigation. Lester Shaw, who had been silent until then, cleared his throat. Mr. Bowling, I think we should discuss this in a more private setting. Perhaps we can find a solution that will satisfy all parties. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Shaw, I cut him off, and nothing to decide. Rachel no longer has anything to do with my family or my business, and if she doesn't want to end up in jail, she'd better disappear from our lives for good. Are you threatening me? Rachel narrowed her eyes. I wouldn't advise it. I have some cards to play too. For example, documents signed by your precious son, documents that could cost him his freedom. Those documents have already been reviewed by my lawyers, I smiled. They contain so many violations that any court would declare them invalid, especially considering your criminal past and the methods you used to force Oliver to sign them. Rachel looked at me with hatred. Her hands clenched into fists. A vein bulged in her neck. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll all regret this. No one treats Rachel Frost like this. You mean Esther Page? I asked calmly. Or maybe Vern Lloyd? Or Catherine Moss? So many names, so hard to remember. That was the last straw. Rachel lunged at me with a furious scream, but Quentin caught her halfway. She kicked and screamed as he held her at a safe distance. I think you'd better leave, Miss Frost, he said, before I call the police. Lester Shaw, clearly embarrassed by his client's behavior, tried to regain control of the situation. Miss Frost, please calm down, he said. This isn't helping our case. What case, Mr. Shaw? I asked. Extortion? Fraud? Attempted murder? Are you sure you want to be associated with these crimes? The lawyer hesitated. It was clear that he hadn't expected this turn of events and was now assessing the risk to his career. I think we should leave, he finally said. Miss Frost, let's go. Rachel stopped resisting and straightened up, adjusting her clothes. Her face was a mask of cold fury. This isn't over, she said, looking at me. You'll regret this. Go, Rachel, Oliver said wearily. Just go and don't come back. She gave him one last look full of hatred and left the room, accompanied by Shaw. Quentin followed them to make sure they really left the house. When the door closed behind them, silence fell over the room. Then Iris came over and hugged me. "My God, Higgins," she whispered. "How did you put up with all this? Why didn't you call us for help sooner?" "I was managing," I replied, hugging her back. "I didn't want to put you in danger." Gradually, the tension in the room eased. My relatives discussed what had happened, offered their support and help. Oliver stood aside, watching silently. By evening, everyone had left, promising to stay in touch and be on the alert. The house was empty, with only Oliver, the security guards, and me remaining. We sat in my office, silently watching the gathering dusk through the window. Finally, Oliver broke the silence. "What now, Dad?" he asked quietly. "Now we move on," I replied. "Rachel is no longer a threat to us, at least not directly. Do you think she'll come back?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "People like her rarely give up, but now we have evidence against her, and she knows it. She'll probably change her name and start over somewhere else." Oliver nodded, looking at his hands. "I was such an idiot," he said. "I let her manipulate me, use me against you." I let you down, Dad." I looked at my son for a long time. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to say that it was okay, that I understood. But another part, the part that remembered his coldness, his distrust, his willingness to believe Rachel over me, couldn't forgive so easily. "Yes, you let me down," I finally said. "But most importantly, you let yourself down, Oliver. You let your emotions cloud your judgment. You didn't trust your own father, who always wanted the best for you." Oliver looked up at me, his eyes full of pain. "I know," he whispered, "and I don't know how to fix it." "I'm not sure it can be fixed," I sighed. "Some things once broken cannot be put back together. Trust is one of them. Are you saying you'll never be able to trust me again?" His voice sounded desperate. "I'm saying we both need time," I replied. "Time to process what happened, to understand where we went wrong. I'm not perfect, Oliver. Maybe I was too controlling, too demanding. Maybe that's why you believed Rachel so easily when she said bad things about me." He was silent, and I could see that my words had hurt him. But it was the truth, and we both needed to acknowledge it. "What should I do?" he finally asked. "Where should I go?" "You can stay here," I said. "The room in the far wing is yours for as long as you want. But I think you should start rebuilding your life. Find a job, a place to live, regain your independence." "What about the company?" He looked me in the eye. "You always said it would be mine one day." I was silent for a long time, thinking about my answer. What I was about to say was difficult but necessary. "I've decided to rewrite my will," I finally said. "The company and the house will no longer pass to you after my death." His face contorted with pain and shock. "You're taking away my inheritance?" he whispered. "For one mistake?" "It wasn't just a mistake, Oliver." I shook my head. "You demonstrated a lack of sound judgment, a lack of loyalty, a lack of business acumen. You allowed a woman you had known for less than a year to ruin your career, get you into debt, and nearly become an accomplice to the murder of your own father. These are not the qualities of a man I can trust with my life's work." He looked at me with bitterness and resentment, but he didn't argue. Somewhere deep down, he must have known I was right. "Then what will happen to the company?" he asked hoarsely. "I'm setting up a trust," I replied. "The company will be managed by a board of directors with clear instructions on how to distribute profits. Some will go to charity, some to educational programs for children from disadvantaged families. You will receive a monthly allowance sufficient for a comfortable life, but no more than that. And the house? The house will be sold and the money added to the trust." Oliver stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the darkening garden for a long time. His shoulders slumped, but his back was straight. The pride I had once taught him. "I understand," he finally said. "I don't agree, but I understand. It's your right." "It's not a punishment, son," I said gently. "It's protection. Protection of what I've built all my life from possible mistakes in the future, including my own." He nodded without turning around. "I'll stay for a few days," he said. "Then I'll find an apartment and a job. I'll start over. Like you said, I'll be happy to help," I offered. with references, with the first month's rent. No, he shook his head. Thanks, but no. I have to do this myself. Prove to myself that I can. I respected his decision, even though part of me wanted to insist on helping. But maybe that was his problem all these years. Too much help from me, too little independence. Oliver went to his room shortly after that conversation. I remained alone in the study, looking at the night garden through the window. The house seemed empty and quiet, despite the presence of security and servants. I thought about my life, the choices I had made, the paths I had taken. I had built a successful business, acquired my dream home, and protected it all from those who wanted to take it away. But the price was my family. First my wife, now my son. Maybe Oliver was right. Maybe I really was always too controlling, too sure of myself. But I protected what I had built my whole life, even at the cost of losing my family. And now, looking up at the night sky, I felt a strange calm. I did what I had to do. And if loneliness is the price I have to pay for it, I am willing to pay it.